Ooh, hello, this is the latest AQR webinar, so welcome one and all. And this time round we've got Jon Alexander, who's kindly joined us, along with Caroline Noon from Vivid Research. Jon has got three current jobs listed on his LinkedIn page. He's got the Food Ethics Council and the Comms Lab, but we're here to talk about the first, the new citizenship project. He moved from the advertising industry, and he's got a background as a planner with AMV, BBDO and Fallon, to co-founding the new citizenship project, asking deeper and deeper questions about the language and idea of the consumer. And he's interested in this shift in every aspect of society and loves to see and support the emergence of new modes of participation everywhere, from cultural heritage to journalism to the food system. And today he's going to discuss the rise of the citizen, the trivialization of brand purpose, and how people are switching from consuming to participating. So Caroline, would you like to kick off?
Yes, so we first encountered Jon, or several of us on the AQR board encountered Jon. We did Radio 4's Forethought programme. And one of the things that stood out there was, Jon, you were talking about the idea that the consumer is killing us and we must kill it. So as a group whom bread and butter is the consumer, we're really interested to sort of engage with you on that and hear about your perspective and the whole concept of the citizenship. So to kick off, can we get you to talk a bit about your new citizenship project and the concept of citizen shift? There's lots of shoulds in that, which is quite odd.
Yes, I tripped you off as much as I possibly can. Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. So new citizenship project, the way I describe it, well, the way we describe ourselves, we say we're an innovation consultancy. We help organisers do stuff better and do better stuff because we think of people differently. Behind that, if you think of people as consumers, the only ideas you ever really come up with are stuff people buy from you. If you think of people as citizens, you have to start by asking, what are we even trying to do in the world? Why do we exist? Why are we here? What impact do we want to have? And how can people be part of that? How can people contribute to that and do that with us? So and all of our work is underpinned by this idea, this concept we call the citizen shift. And there's a report that the URL is www.citizenshift.info. If people want to have a look into this, if I either concern you enough to make you want to, or inspire you enough to make you want to, do go and have a look. But what that is, we talk about how sort of piece this together as a conceptual frame from studying in various academic disciplines and so on. But essentially what it boils down to very quickly is an idea that while the way we tend to think society works, we think we're consumers and citizens and shareholders and voters and parents and employees and so forth, and that we inhabit all of those roles and we move between them relatively seamlessly. What we argue is that actually at any given time, one of those roles sort of steps up above the others and comes to inform them all with its logic, and that meta role, you might think of it, changes over time. So we talk about at the root of our work, we talk about a shift in the dominant story of the individual in society, from subject to consumer to citizen. So it's sort of broadly, I'm not going to do justice to the research and the nuance behind it, but broadly historical shift, which goes end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th, we were something like subjects. So the right thing to do is keep your head down, do as you're told. And that informs all the things we do, and the best society will result if we all deal with that and act in that way. Coming out of the two world wars through the second half of the 20th century, that idea is more or less deliberately replaced by a story that is best understood as the consumer. So in that case, the right thing to do is to get the best deal for yourself, to look out for number one, to choose the option that's best suited to you from those that are made available by someone else. And if everyone does that, then the best society will result. And our argument is that what's happening right now is we're living through, just as the subject story collapsed before, we're living through the collapse of this consumer story. And what's bubbling is something like the citizen, an idea that if subject was keep your head down, as you're told, consumers get the best deal for yourself. Citizen is something like get involved, shape the context of your own life, express your agency in the world. And if everyone does that, then the best society will result. So what we do as an organisation is we essentially take that framework, and help organisations of all sorts, all shapes and sizes, look at themselves and look at the way they interact with their audiences, customers, citizens, people, and ask, like, when are we trapped in a consumer frame, and what might it look like for us to step into a citizen frame, and what might we do if we thought of people in that way.
So are you seeing sort of expressions of the citizenship in the brand world at the moment? I mean, where are you seeing that most acutely at the moment?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, sorry?
Are there examples where it's coming through into the brand and commercial world already?
Absolutely. I mean, I consider everything to be brand world to a large extent, but certainly in commercial world, it's absolutely happening. I mean, we talk about it happening in every aspect of society and all across the world as soon as you scratch the surface. So the dominant story is still the consumer, but this thing is coming fast. So we talk in formal politics, it's in the rise of participatory democracy around the world. Structures like Decide Madrid, the platform which enables any citizen in Madrid to propose ideas for how the city's run. They have a standing citizens' assembly that has decision-making power. The German-speaking part of Belgium's just introduced a major new structure that has effectively a kind of House of Lords, but by sortition rather. So it's in politics, it's in communities, it's in kind of things like Incredible Edible and transition movement and local currencies that are becoming really important.
Yeah,
and
but when you look at things like Madrid, isn't that where it should be, which is in the citizenship space rather than?
Well, I don't think so. But I mean, yes, it should be there, but it should be and is going to be everywhere, I think. So where I was coming to is that I think that the role of the two levels in commercial world, the role of business in society is changing dramatically. So the settlement, the sort of Friedman logic of the social responsibility of businesses to maximise its profits has collapsed. I think is collapsing right now. And what we're seeing is like things like the B Corporation movement, the legal structure of a benefit corporation, the idea, embodying the idea that the right thing for business to be for businesses to be as a citizen in society, not in itself a consumer of society, maximising its own returns.
But are we seeing that as an agreed thing at the moment, that is the right thing, the whole idea of a company almost as a citizenship? I mean, that doesn't seem to have cut through yet, does it? I mean, we're still in brand CSR and brand purpose territory at the moment.
Yes, I think that's right. That's why I say I think we're living in a moment when the consumer story is collapsing and doesn't make sense anymore, and so we're seeing kind of ructions like Brexit and Trump and so forth. But really real big strong anti-business feeling. But at the same time, there is the positive new story that could be the positive resolution of that. This isn't what I'm talking about. While it is anti, one of the ways I say this is that it's not. The problem isn't consumption. The problem isn't business. The problem is consumerism. The problem is the identity construct of the consumer and the idea of people as consumers. And the reason why that's important is because what it does is it limits what we think people are capable of. And therefore, actually, it's a limitation on the operation, even of business. Like businesses that interact with people, that seek to harness people's agency in serving a higher purpose. And I mean, and when I say higher purpose, I do see that as distinctly different from the way the idea of brand purpose has kind of become trivialized as a new sort of synonym for corporate social responsibility. The brand businesses that genuinely seek to serve something and hold something higher than profit, like Kickstarter was the first organisation in the US to actually change its legal structure to be a benefit corporation, right, which means that their shareholders have a fiduciary duty to hold them to maximisation of purpose, not just profit.
Which is interesting, because I was trying to understand how I would see this in the brand world, because we're relating to brands sort of on a work basis, on a project by project basis, brand strategy all the time, and it's not something that we're feeding back or seeing coming through. So an example of Kickstarter, I certainly didn't know that. I mean, are there others in other brands that show some of those principles? Lights always go off.
Just went off behind me. I don't know quite what I did wrong, but so yes, I mean, yes, there are. I think And maybe it's helpful first, actually, before I talk about more examples, to just give you a sense of where I think the distinction is. So, and there's a story that I tell, which is to help make this point, which is I used to work when I was working in advertising, when I was working at Fallon, actually, we had I was working on Unilever, and a business that many consider to be like absolutely at the forefront. And I agree. Like in many ways, the work I do isn't a kind of everyone's evil, change everything, but it's a sort of how do we build on something positive that's emerging. We're called the New Citizenship Project, not the Consumer Doom Project, right? So, but going back to that moment at Fallon working on Unilever, we had a brief that was about encourage people to look for and ask for sustainable palm oil products, and to request sustainable palm oil in shopping behaviour. And we proposed an ad that it was only a small. It's sort of one of these things. It was only a small project, like a press and poster thing. And the idea that we proposed back was to use an image of the Greenpeace Unilever protests from the year before. So this was near a decade ago, I guess. And the headline that we proposed. So this was when Greenpeace had people dressed as orangutans on Unilever's headquarters, mm-hmm. and that actually had led to the creation of the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil and an awful lot of stuff. The ad we proposed was use an image of that with the headline that this was our wake-up call, this is yours. And so endorsing activism, saying to people like there is a role for this in the world. What happened was that I'd sort of got so far up through the things, actually quite a lot of people in the organisation were quite keen to run it, and then it got killed, and the ad that ran in its place was a nice picture of a rainforest with the line, what you buy in the supermarket can change the world, which it can't. And the thing what sits behind that for me is that one of those advertisements would have been endorsing the idea that people have agency in the world, endorsing that acting as a political citizen, acting as an activist is something that is a constructive part of society. The ad that ran said, "Shush, little people, just go shopping. Your role is as consumers, and that is the only agency you have." And that in a way, that to me is that's and the Rainforest Alliance have done communications. There was a famous ad called Follow the Frog, which to me did exactly the same thing. That to me is the worst of this.
So brands that are coming through that sort of are often on a digital basis, as you say, Kickstarter and other things that are coming through in that vein, are fulfilling more of the citizenship role for you.
Absolutely. I mean, my favourite example, which I mentioned to you when we were talking about this call, was is BrewDog. So those of you who don't know, those people who don't know it, like these guys effectively invented equity crowdfunding back in, I think, 2007, maybe 2009, before any of the platforms existed. They went, actually, we don't want to sell. We've got a good product, but we don't want to sell it. We don't want to be owned completely by. We want the people who drink our product to own it with us. They have articulated very clearly, and this is where it's quite interesting. It's not necessarily a kind of higher purpose is not necessarily instantly worthy, but it is something that draws an organisation up above its immediate profit margins. And so BrewDog have articulated, our mission is to make everyone as passionate about great craft beer as we are. And by holding that, it's driven them to act completely differently in so many ways. First, as I say, to sort of pioneer equity crowdfunding, but also they do all sorts of fascinating things. Like they invest 20% of their profits in other independent breweries. They feature those other independent breweries at their AGM. Their AGM is a 6,000 person gathering every year. Yes, it's a piss up in a brewery, so they have a neat mechanic for doing that, but they do shareholder resolutions. They involve the mass of people. They run a training course called the Cicerone, which is like a sommelier but for beer, where they're kind of equipping people to be genuine champions. All this stuff. But the fascinating thing, just to come back to you, the fascinating thing about BrewDog is that idea of people as having agency and being able to be part of this mission ends up encouraging them to behave in ways or making them behave in ways that are actually much more socially constructive. So BrewDog were one of the first living wage employers in the UK. They have pioneered the construction of eco breweries. They even got called back from a lawsuit that they were suing a small independent, and and all of this driven by their equity punks, what they call their shareholders, who by having had their agency harnessed, being part of this thing, are then holding them to account and getting them to work in very different ways. And that to me is a citizen relationship, where you are not just we produce products and you consume them. You are saying, we're doing something in the world, come and be part of it and shape how we do it.
So if preaching to the converted is easier, it's the sort of low-hanging fruit, and those people are obviously warm to it, what tools do you have to convince the rest of the world and the more established firms that this is a route worth going down?
Why is this preaching to the converted, I guess, would be the question I'd ask. What are you basing that
Well, I'm to hear you talk about Brewdog, it sounds as though it's a newer firm, it's more attuned to the audience, whereas a more established firm like Unilever has a few more problems in actually changing its mindset.
Yeah, the thought I also had similarly was if it's about personal, citizenship as personal agency, can you retrofit that back on brands that have not been developed from this sort of people power last 10-year phase of existence to ones that existed before? Can it be retrofitted with tools or however you might do that? What's your thought on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it absolutely can. I give one example to sort of speak to that. I guess there aren't many kind of more different organisations to Brewdog than something like the National Trust, for example, and we've done quite a bit of work with the Trust over the years. The idea of the National Trust actually as an organisation that isn't in a consumer logic, that the National Trust becomes an organisation that runs a visitor attraction business, makes money from that, and then spends it on conservation. In a citizen logic, the National Trust, and this what we've worked on with them over the years and shaped some of their communications very differently as a result, among other things. But the National Trust goes, actually, we're an organisation that's about championing the importance of special places in the world, championing the importance of beauty, and doing that with people and giving people ways of doing that with us as well. And so we have a kind of set of tools. We talk about there being 3 principles of participatory organisations. We talk about, and this is where like the brand man comes back, like the alliteration is everywhere. We talk about there being 3 principles of participatory organisations. Purpose, so what are you really trying to do in the world? Not just sort of what's the CSR thing you append to spend your profits on, but what core are you doing in the world? And platform, which is how can you provide the space and structures and scaffolding for people to do that with you, and prototypes, so how do you evolve in that direction? So I guess what I'd say to some of where you're coming from is this also is never in either at the macro level of society or in the kind of micro of an individual organisation. This isn't a kind of utopian switch. This isn't a kind of flip. We become something different overnight. But what I believe is going on is that in any organisation really worth its salt, there is a sense of purpose. Like the Unilever, the founding moments of these organisations were often deeply purposeful, but have become kind of co-opted and disappeared, just as has happened with the National Trust, which you might think of as being a sort of an inherently purposeful organisation. That purpose got hidden behind a kind of consumer business model.
When do you
draw these things out, you can do something really interesting, but you can't flip it overnight. You can evolve there.
Yeah, the differentiation between the bolt-on brand purpose versus the actual purpose of the brand is very hard, presumably, to define and deliver. And a lot of your organisations, looking at your reports, are membership organisations, so Co-op, Nationwide, National Trust, as you said, and that seems much closer to personal agency than a Unilever brand or a Marmite or what have you. And I suppose the observation is that to find that sort of the citizen shift applied to Marmite versus the Co-op or the National Trust seems a very different beast. And can it be?
Yeah, I can't immediately crack Marmite for you, although I think I don't know. Yeah, Persil, say for instance, though, and some organisations have tiptoed really interestingly close with some of the brand purpose work they've done. Brand purpose, and like you say, it's a fine line, and I'm not dismissing all work that's been done in this space, because some has got, I think, really close and actually could if it were pursued fully, could really open up into something really powerful.
Yeah.
But some has been very trivial. The personal sort of the whole kind of dirt is good thing, just to take an example, like that is potentially very interesting, but too often, and the only agency that's offered is, or the only thing that's encouraged is buy this product. That's, if you believe this, buy this, rather than, and that's why Brewdog is kind of an interesting example for these organisations to look at, because Brewdog go, believe this, here's all this stuff, like let's do all of this and let's do it together, and wouldn't that be great? Like, where and so something like a personal dirt is good. What if that really was opening up? Like, how do we reconnect human nature? What could personal, what other organisations could they join with and support and be part of? Just as Brewdog has sort of cultivated a movement of organisations that has changed the drinking habits of the country and beyond.
But I mean,
if your ambition is higher, and actually the returns are greater if you do that. I think that's this is a really interesting aspect of this. Like, Brewdog are fastest growing, the only company to be listed in the Sunday Times fastest growing 100 companies in the UK for the last 6 years running.
yes,
And they're not doing that by focusing on the immediate. They're doing that by having a higher thing and developing deeper relationships as a result. So when people buy into something, you've got much greater sense than if they just buy from.
but if you go back to your personal example, and there you've got sort of a killer insight, a fantastic advert, completely the emotional territory for mothers, and dirt is good, it says everything. Is that the higher purpose of the brand? Or that isn't? Surely that's the purpose of that excellent insight and hugely impressive sort of advertising around it.
Well, what a waste. What a waste.
I don't know, is there a purpose there, I suppose?
How boring. Like, wicked. You've identified a really important social phenomenon and something that people really want to do something about, and wicked. You made an ad and sold some stuff. Like, well done.
I suppose that is the question. Where are we with bolting it on and it being a communication tool versus real purpose, and the brands that are really achieving it? Because I know you're working with, as we said, the Co-op nationwide. People, they're people-focused brands. And I could sort of get.
They still have to make money, like, and they still, like, this isn't, the Co-op is fighting in many ways in one of the most cutthroat industries in the world, right? Food retail and other retail environments, like that. You can't just sort of excuse in either direction. And this is what I'm saying. Like, one of the ways we talk about our stuff is like, what we've become today is consumers who vote, like the identity construct that dominates, and then we even bring that to bear in the places, as you sort of said at the beginning of the call, like that identity gets into places where it shouldn't. My argument is that what we might become, and I think are becoming in many different places, in many different ways, is citizens who consume. That identity becomes dominant, and then consumption becomes relegated to its rightful place as one of the things that we do, yes, not the dominant thing that we do.
But one of the things you referenced is that when you talk about things as around the consumer and around the citizenship, people behave very differently, and the citizen is almost a kinder place. The consumer opens up to different sort of agency, different choices, different ways of behaving. Sort of just references. So it does seem that it sets up a whole different construct of how we behave from some things you put out, certainly in your Radio 4 program.
Yeah, I mean, we've done quite a bit of social psychology type research, priming studies, that sort of thing, where even putting the word consumer into the framing of a resource dilemma. This is the one I think you're referring to that was in the Radio 4 talk, where set a scenario where you say you're one of 4 households dependent on a single well for your water supply, and the well's starting to run dry. And then you ask people, so you need to use less water. And then you ask people 2 questions: to what extent are you prepared to use less water, and to what extent do you trust the other 3 households to use less water as well? What we did was, the study, half the respondents, that's exactly how it's framed. For the other half of respondents, the word household was replaced by the word consumer. So, and that's the only difference statistically, nationally representative samples, etc., etc. The people for whom the word is consumer are significantly less willing to compromise on their own behaviour and significantly less likely to trust the others. And this is just one of many studies we've done that cover everything from environmental and social motivation, participatory motivation. Like, as soon as you start thinking, and the way we talk about this with the organisations we work with is, as soon as you start using the word consumer inside your organisation or inside your grouping, you end up you're building on scaffolding that only allows you're sort of walking down a path that only allows people to do certain things, and only thinks of people as being capable of and desirous of doing certain things. And it's just and by doing that, you project that story out onto them, and therefore it's no surprise when they respond in that way back. But but that is only a story. It's not human nature, and it can, and if you remove that, then you can open up an awful lot of different will and a lot greater will, greater involvement.
But you're saying at the moment the dominant story is still the consumer, and in our qualitative world, we are dealing with consumers and brands. I mean, our role, do we go back to clients and say, sort of, this is coming down the road, or are there things that they need to know is coming down the road? What's the next thing to look for in this path towards more citizenship, on this citizen shift?
I mean, I think as there's a few things I'd say as qual researchers, like so I mean, I think if you look into the B Corporation movement, look into benefit corporations, understand what's going on with read New Power, a book that was shortlisted for FT Book of the Year last year. It's full of these stories. We did a lot of the research for it, and we're quite deeply involved. Like this is not a behind the scenes story. This is full frontal. This is right there. FT McKinsey Book of the Year is about this, and so I think that sort of, in that kind of trend spotting for clients, that's what you should be doing. In terms of like how might you cultivate it, I think the kind of asking questions in those situations, in thinking of them less as kind of focus groups where you're kind of making sense of what people are saying and playing middleman, like create something together. Like this is we were talking a little the difference between these things. What you guys are amazing facilitators. What if you were using that to make sense of the world and make sense of opportunities with people? What if you were working with them to generate what could be possible?
Yeah.
What if you were harnessing the lived experience of mothers in those personal groups, rather than just assessing
I think that
teaching to converse is here. I think that's
that plays to the methodologies that we use. And you said at the beginning that you look at people in the round when you sort of explore them and move them forward, is exactly what Qual is certainly doing now, much beyond the focus group. So yeah, I think we're there on that, but it's sort of looking at the themes. So no, that's anyway. So coming down the track, trend read and play back, and a nice book plug. So that's fantastic.
What do you think a membership organisation like AQR should do if it wants to engage with citizenship?
I think clearly you already do quite a bit of it, given Caroline's a volunteer hosting and interrogating a punctilious person like me. But the main thing, so those three principles, that idea of purpose, platform, prototype, like so often, and one of the reasons we do a lot of work with membership organisations, because that was one of the first sort of founding pieces of work we did on the future of membership, and there's a report on it that you can have a look at if you like. What we often talk about is like, make more explicit why does this organisation exist? What are you trying to do? What like, as an association of qual researchers, like, can you be more open with, like, this is what we really want this to be, this is why we've gathered? Is it just to defend the interests of that group, or is it actually to try and further it, and that sort of thing? Like, and then the second, so that's the purpose bit, and then the platform bit is like, and how can people do more with you with that? And we've one of the things we developed as another report we did with the cooperative movement called Everyday Participation, which was basically going, so here are seven modes of everyday participation. What's the space between kind of governance and just consuming? And there's loads of really juicy stuff in there that sort of we've taken from examples from organisations all over the world. So that's there as well. But it's sort of, the critical questions are like, how do you more put the purpose of what you're trying to do really forefront, and then give people structured and construct and sort of a breadth of ways to contribute to that, rather than just sort of sign up for benefits.
Great.
Sounds good enough.
Do you have final questions? Because I know we've taken all your time so far. Luella, did you have a final question, or did you want to share on the workshop?
Unless anybody who's floating out there fancies sending a question in, I think we'll probably quit as we are. But would like to say that now's your chance. We have a system whereby we can see your questions if you want to type one in. But if not, just to do a little bit of a plug about what's coming up on AQR, which is we've got a really good workshop coming up, which is a new one, called the Living Portrait Masterclass. And it's on 12th of April, and spaces are filling up fast. And it's a day designed to inspire our outputs to be more meaningful and inspiring. It will be interactive, thought-provoking, and there's a session inspired by playwriting on how we can use human language better in our outputs, a photography masterclass with feedback, and a debate on the blurring between truth and fiction in videoed research. And something was pinging at me just then. I'm not quite
That was me.
Good to know it's live. And she carries on pinging. So yes, all I'd like to do is say thank you very much, Jon. I mean, that was fascinating. And I look forward to hearing the reaction of our members in due course.
Good stuff. Thank you for having me. And sorry if I come across as being a bit kind of, I'm enthusiastic. I don't mean to come across as critical, so I apologise if I did.
That's okay. Thank you very much. Cheers, one and all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye. She said, trying to end.